In this video, we're going to do every single swing state's most recent poll, showing you what thousands of people surveyed in every state answer with who are you going to vote for in 2024. Break it down now. So of course, a lot of videos will make you fill out 30 states one by one. I'm pretty sure Missouri is going to be red, but we're not so sure about maybe Texas. So let's start off with that big state. So as of earlier last month, we have basically exactly 1,200 people polled simultaneously in two separate ones that showed that Donald Trump is winning by 8 or 9% in each poll given by the Texas Politics Project at the University of Texas. So we're looking at that state going red very easily. Now, we're not going to be doing margins, of course, because that's a shade of autism I won't touch, but we're going to move on to another seminal state. Yes, Florida. So if we look at the trend line, of course, Trump is winning by about 10 as of a couple months ago, and even more recently, about as recently as 4 days ago, Trump is still leading Biden by about 9% in a big race, but in a 1v1, he's still beating him by about 9. And so that's pretty big. Again, it's a small poll, but that's the most recent stuff we've got. Now, that's going to be a red state in Florida. Now, let me give you the backdrop. Okay, Trump right now is winning the popular vote by 1.2%. We could also do a five-way election where we have RFK significantly factored in, but you also have to notice that he only gets about 10% of the popular vote, whereas he used to be in the upper teens. And what's more is that by election time, he'll look like a luxury store version of Gary Johnson in 2016. So we're looking at maybe 5% of the vote share going to RFK. So maybe not decisive at all in this election. But anyway, we can see the margin tying up in the Electoral College. So in an election where Trump wins the popular vote, we still have McLaughlin and Associates pointing to, as of 2 weeks ago, Biden winning the state by about 4%, okay? Other polls but behind that also put him at 1 and 3 in the positive. And so that looks like a Trump loss. And even though when you look at the sponsors for these, you can tell that we do have a good sample size of about 800, and Virginia isn't the biggest state. So we're going to fill that in right now. It's not even considered a swing state, so Trump losing this is no biggie. Now, New Mexico is not a swing state at all. If you can look at it, nobody's put their money towards polling the state. And if you look at it, the most recent poll we have is RFK versus Trump 1v1, where Kennedy wins by 10. Now, that is obviously not going to happen. And so when you look at it that way, we have to go way back. And the most recent poll we have, in fact, is looking at Trump losing to Biden by about 11 in May of 2023. Now, Biden's approval has hit all-time lows. It's as low as 39.2 in the aggregate today. And so it's going to be closer than that, but that's the most recent poll we've got. So we're going to move on to Colorado next. Same deal with the obstinate spending pattern. We have people legitimately polling over 500 contestants or recipients of calls. John Zogby's strategies has RFK beating Trump by 12. Okay, so that's not going to count. But anyway, we're going to fill this in for the more logical reason, which is to say that as of March, so 2 months ago, it was polled more recently than New Mexico even, that Biden's winning by 10. I don't really believe that. I think he's going to win it by maybe 6, but doesn't really matter at that point. That's a Biden dub. So moving on to Iowa. All right, so now once we get past the primary funding for the surveys from yesteryear, we've got the more recent polls as of February 28th of 24. And so that's the most recent stuff. Again, with the John Zogby, I don't know why they're polling Kennedy so much. I guess he's paying them. But the most recent poll we've got 1-to-1 is Trump winning by 15. That's a little lofty, but it doesn't matter. If you win by more than 10, it's the same difference. So that's a Republican state right there. Again, Obama won that in 2012. So it gives you a frame of reference of how the state has shifted from 2012 to 24. Anyway, so we're going to move on to the next state of Ohio. All right, so we haven't had any polls since the primary election we had for the Senate candidacy between Dolan, Moreno, etc. Now, we do have the polls as of 2 months ago in March, saying that Trump is winning by 11 by both of these polls. And that seems to be in line with reality. Trump won both states by unexpectedly large margins in 2020 and 2016. And what's more is that, of course, Ohio isn't even on the grid for battleground states. So it's pretty safe to say it's going Republican here. Moving on. New Hampshire seems to be another state that has been completely and utterly forsaken by the establishment of people that fund these polls, because apparently there are none. In fact, when we look back, we have to go behind the Nikki Haley polls and look all the way back to where? It's not even here. Wow. So no polls as of the last 6 months. Okay, so we have Biden beating Trump by about 3% as of January 15th. So just to be thorough with y'all, Trump as of January 15th of 2024, was up by about 1.2 in the aggregate and still was losing the poll by about 3, which means that New Hampshire's poised to vote 4 points more leftist than does the national environment, if that makes sense. Now, Trump is leading by 1.2, and so that checks out. So a narrow Biden win by 2 to 3 percentage points seems to be in line with reality as we see it. But moving on to North Carolina. Again, I would say the polls aren't really well funded here either, at least as of the last week, because we have Signal, whatever that is, Carolina Journal sponsoring a poll that has Trump up by 5. Now, that includes Kennedy with a 9% vote share, not that it matters. And that's somewhat interesting, of course, because when we look at the more established pollsters like Emerson College with bigger sample sizes, we see that Trump's still winning by 9 or 4 in this case. So even this one has Kennedy actually feeding a lot into Trump versus Biden, whereas here, when it's a 1v1, it's only a 4-point victory. Well, what is a 4 to a 9, but still a positive? And so that's still a Republican state, no matter what you look at. Now, moving on to Georgia. Psych, we're doing Minnesota. So the McLaughlin and Associates are pretty friendly to Trump when you look at the polling overall. But as of about 10 days ago, we have Trump up by 3 points. And then even before that, up by 5, which is interesting. And before that, he was even. And so let's see what the difference is between all the recent polls. So as you can see, this one has no RFK Jr., but it does have a strong Jill Stein vote. I assume that 3% is from the Somalis that are anti-Israel. But when you look here, this one is also adding Kennedy and Stein. And then Stein goes down from 3% to 1, and Kennedy up from nothing, obviously, to 9, which is interesting. And that's an even result. So that's very odd. So that is to say that it's probably pretty even, plus the fact that, of course, Biden seems to be on the downslope. And so that leads Trump to a slight victory, given those polls that are the most recent. And that's a pretty different revelation as that Minnesota goes red. Now, Georgia is up next. Okay, so as of 2 weeks ago, almost exactly, we have a 3-way race showing that Trump beats Biden and everybody else by about 6% in the state of Georgia. Now, Emerson also has a 1v1 where Trump only wins by 2. So the RFK effect looks really prominent for pro-Trump people, but when you look at the crosstabs, and by that I mean just this simple thing here, you see that Kennedy's 5% leads almost exactly 1-for-1 for a Trump higher margin of 4%, and so that's remarkable. And if we look a little bit behind that even, you'll notice that Trump is still beating Biden by 6 and by 7 here, so that's very promising in the state of Georgia, so that's a Republican win easily. Now moving on to Arizona. So now Arizona is probably the next most likely state to go red. And in my opinion, again, Minnesota was a fluke. I was not expecting that result. But Arizona, as of 2 weeks ago, shows that Trump is losing by 1 in a data orbital poll, which I've never heard of. But the more established pollster at the same time, 2 weeks ago, has Trump winning in a 3-way race by 3%. In a 1v1, though, he's winning by 5, which is interesting. It kind of shows that maybe if this poll is true and it's gospel, it shows that Trump is not as favorable in that state, and that moreover that in fact RFK as a moderate is going to get more parked votes of people that are somewhat indifferent towards either candidate, which I can see in Arizona being a thing. Okay, so moving on, I would say that Kennedy getting a 14% vote share and a sample size of only 550 is indicative that the poll isn't good, so a Biden win is not in line. Plus, this poll is taken at the same time as these anyway. And if that's the case, then I lend more credence to this one that has Kennedy getting 9%. And even if you look at the poll by the same group with only 2 candidates, Trump is still winning by 5. So that's very positive for the Trump campaign, of course. So that's a safe red. And by safe red, I mean just confident red. Now, the Nebraska second thing is not a thing you can check, but so we're going to leave that as is. But we have some more states, even though Trump won already. And I think the next most likely state is Nevada. So again, Emerson College seems to be a pretty decent vector for what the most large prominent pollster says as the survey result. And right now we have over 1,000 respondents in each of these as of 2 weeks ago saying that Trump is winning in a contested race by 5, whereas in a 1v1, he's only winning by 1. And so again, similar phenomenon to Arizona where the third party actually helps Donald more than it subtracts from or is indifferent to, such as in other states in the Midwest. Now, moving on, I think that when you look at it this way, it's predicting that Kennedy gets 8%, which is interesting because, again, the nominal support for Kennedy has been falling just gradually over time. A couple months ago when I started this whole thing, it was Kennedy like 17%, 19%. People seem to be making up their minds as to which one of the 2 plantations they're walking on, and they're deciding either Trump or Democrat, and they're mostly going Trump out of that that group. But anyway, so Trump's winning by 5 as of 2 weeks ago in Nevada. Whereas if it's a 1v1, which it won't be, it's going to be Trump +1. So it's still a win. So let's fill this in. That's red. Now let's go to Wisconsin. So now these are another result dump that I find really nuclear and disturbing. Okay, so first of all, with Minnesota, as you know, I honestly thought it was going to be like a Biden +4, and it turned out that Trump was slightly leading Minnesota. But then you look at Wisconsin, which should be a Trump +4, and then evidently it shows Biden winning, which is odd. Now, of course, I don't believe that to be the case, but let's cross-reference these two recent polls, okay? So looking at April 29th, so 2 weeks ago, Emerson College, which is the one we've been using mostly, has Trump winning by 3 or 4, which is in line with Trump winning the popular vote, and Trump outperforming the popular vote result in 2016 and 20 in the swing states, and namely the Rust Belt, which Wisconsin is proudly a part of. Now, of course, we have May 6th, a week later, Quinnipiac, which is a liberal institution. But anyway, we have Biden winning by 1. Let's look into this one. So again, only 1,000 people were surveyed for Emerson, whereas this liberal pollster has about 1,500. Now, that's impressive. Let's look into it. So it shows Trump with only 39%, Biden with 40%, Kennedy at 12%, which is abnormally high, of course. And then we've got Stein at 4%, and which is abnormally high again. And so that's interesting. When you look at this, though, it shows that Kennedy hurts Trump versus like in every other state, he's either a neutral or benefits him. And by benefit, I mean he's parasitic against the Democrats in Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada, from what I recall. Whereas again, here it's the sheer opposite, which doesn't really make sense. But let's move on. Quinnipiac in a 1v1 has Trump losing by 6. I'm tending to believe this, but we're also going to look at another source like Wisconsin polling on RCP. So this is going to have a more variant sample size. And if you look at it, Trump's winning by 0.5. So you meet that Biden slight win and the Trump slight win in the middle, and it's a Trump slight win. So looking at this, let's put it in a 5-way race. All of a sudden, Kennedy's vote share drops to 9.6, whereas Quinnipiac, for some reason, had him at 12, which is odd. But then what's more is that Trump's vote share increases with different parties being on the ballot, which is discongruent or incongruent with this pollster right here, the Quinnipiac University one. And so that's very confounding. That being said, I'm just for the sake of the argument going to put this as a blue state, which does not make sense, okay? If Wisconsin goes Democrat and Minnesota goes red, I should go bald for a month because, I mean, that's just completely erroneous. But moving on to Michigan. All right, so we have, as of 2 weeks ago, Emerson apparently just spent a whole bag on late April polling. But evidently, we've got Trump winning in a 1v1 by about 4% in Michigan. Whereas if we look at, a 3-way race with Kennedy involved, he's only winning by 1. So interesting that Kennedy takes away vote from Trump disproportionately in Wisconsin and Michigan, and in every other state, Kennedy is a net positive for Donald. So very odd how that works, in my opinion. And what's also interesting is that for some reason, the Quinnipiac poll had Wisconsin going 4% Stein, but she's down at 1 in Michigan, which is odd because Michigan has more of a pro-Gaza disposition and demography than Wisconsin does. So that's not really in line with reality. But Kennedy only has 5% of the support in Michigan, whereas in Wisconsin, he has 12. So that Quinnipiac poll is looking like an externality, like a negative one at that. That being said, that outlier is still going to be valid because that's the cause of the video, is the latest poll, basically no matter what. That being said, Emerson still has Trump winning in both cases. So we're going to fill that in for what it's worth as a Republican state. Now, if you cross-reference this with the RCP average, you'll notice that Emerson is in line with the average for all of them. Okay. And again, there's so many polls put into this aggregate that are pro-Trump. And by pro-Trump, I mean show him winning, not being partial to him. So this poll of him being up by 4 is probably more in line with reality than is the Quinnipiac poll showing Biden winning Wisconsin. Okay. Anyway, let's go on to Pennsylvania. This is arguably the most important state. It doesn't have the most electoral votes as compared to Texas, California, Florida. But what it does have is a disproportionate amount for a swing state, okay? So when we're talking swing states, we're talking mainly Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, Michigan, New Hampshire, Wisconsin, So out of those states, of course, we have Pennsylvania with 19. So that's the strongest one. We're going to go ahead and check that right now. So we have polls as of, again, 2 weeks ago by Fabrizio Lee and Associates in Impact Research. Now, 600 respondents is somewhat small. That being said, if we look at the bigger poll, like Emerson at the same time, has Trump winning by 2 and 4% respectively. But let's look at the most recent one. It has Trump winning by 4 and 5 again. Now, what's interesting about this is that Kennedy gets 5% of the vote. No, sorry, it's Stein. No Kennedy. Again, very odd polling. So disregard this one entirely. Plus, who the hell is Oliver, by the way? Who is that? Getting 3% of the vote. But we have Trump in a 1v1 winning by 4, which is in line with reality. Now let's cross-check this with the RCP average. And if you look at it that way, Trump is still winning it. Now, moving on, we can also check the 5-way result if you put Kennedy on the ballot and Trump is still winning. So that's very promising for him right there. That's the Keystone State going red again. Last since 2016, at least officially. So we have that as a Republican state. So here we go. According to polls, the most latest ones, this is what would happen. Now, we have some surprises, of course. We have some crazy results like Minnesota or New Hampshire being derived or deprived of any sort of polling funding. And that shows you what's going on. If you like the video, comment down below and like as well. Subscribe if you haven't yet. Comment down below what you want exactly. By the way, I'm open to all recommendations that are high IQ. And I'd love to see you in the comment section. I'll check y'all on the next one. Adios.